Tonight, inflation easing, the consumer price index ticking down to a still high 6.5%. Plus, competing with China. House Republicans and Democrats focus on countering Chinese aggression.
There is bipartisan consensus that the era of trusting communist China is over.
And hitting the grid.
We definitely need to look at making some of our key facilities way more hardened than they are.
And how to protect against everything from vandalism to coordinated attacks. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. President Biden facing new questions about classified documents. Thanks for joining us for Faith Nation. In Washington, I'm Matt Gelka. The Justice Department is taking action to investigate those documents dating back to President Biden's time as vice president. Today, it was revealed more classified materials were found at the president's Wilmington home. This after similar papers were found at an office space here in Washington, D.C. CBN News senior Washington correspondent Tara Mergener has more on tonight's top story. Tara, today, Attorney General Merrick Garland outlined a timeline of these discoveries. Break that down for us.
That's right, Matt. We have to rewind to before the midterm elections. Garland says the first discovery came before November 4th of last year, when the president's lawyers found classified documents at the Penn Biden Center in D.C. Those were immediately turned over to the National Archives. The Justice Department was notified and an official investigation began. Fast forward to December, more documents were found, and this time at the president's Delaware home. Today, the president's lawyer alerted the DOJ to an additional discovery there, and the attorney general announced next steps in the investigation.
I signed an order appointing Robert Hur as special counsel for the matter I've just described. The document authorizes him to investigate whether any person or entity violated the law in connection with this matter.
Now, the attorney general says appointing the special counsel is in the public interest. Meanwhile, President Biden again reiterating he did not know the classified documents were at the Penn Biden Center or anywhere at his home.
My Corvette's in a locked garage, okay? So it's not like you're sitting out in the street. I take classified documents and classified materials seriously. I also said we're cooperating fully and completely with the Justice Department's review.
Now, meanwhile, Republicans are quick to point out what they call a double standard after an FBI search and seizure of former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago property last summer turned up classified documents.
This is what makes America not trust their government. You cannot have one form of law because somebody philosophically has a different opinion than you, and you can't use the Justice Department to go after people that are politically different as well. It has to be equal across.
House Republicans are now adding another investigation onto President Biden's handling of classified documents, in addition to other ongoing investigations that seem to keep growing, Matt.
Well, Tara, thank you. Plenty to keep watching out for. And here now to discuss is CBN News chief political analyst David Brody. David, the president and the documents, do you think the president will face real repercussions over all this?
I think there's a very real concern that he'll face real repercussions over this, Matt, for sure. I mean, and here's the problem. There's a lot of fill in the blank and dots that we just don't know. We need to know the timeline. We need to know not necessarily what President Biden knew when he knew it, but what did his staff know? I mean, let's remember these boxes that were holed up for what, years? I mean, at this point, you know, the Biden folks are going to make it appear that no one knew what was in the boxes. Well, hold on. There are top classified documents in the boxes. So exactly how in the world did that happen? Let's also remember he's vice president of the United States at the time. And so that I think is the key differentiation between this and what was going on with Donald Trump and Mar-a-Lago, because a president can declassify documents, a vice president cannot.
Yeah, of course, you just brought up former President Trump. We all saw the FBI raid of former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. How is that situation different from this one with now President Biden?
Well, other than what I just pointed out, as we talked about, there's a couple other things that are interesting here, and it really starts with the pot calling the kettle black. I mean, in essence, the Republicans and the folks that are aligned with Donald Trump are going to say this is a two-tier system of justice that we're seeing play out. Now, having said that, the special counsel was appointed by Merrick Garland today to investigate the Biden documents, so they can't really kind of complain about that at this point. But we're going to wait to see exactly what this special counsel does, as opposed to the special counsel that is investigating Donald Trump and the Mar-a-Lago documents. I mean, think about this. This is an amazing time in American history. We have a president of the United States. There will be a special counsel investigating a sitting president of the United States for what may have happened years ago. And we have a former president of the United States that is also being investigated by a special counsel. I mean, I'll have to go back and consult my sources from 1843, but I can't quite remember a time in American history where that has ever happened. As a matter of fact, it has not happened. So the point is, we're living through very historic times. And let me just also point out on Joe Biden. Let's remember what Joe Biden said on 60 Minutes. I mean, he complained to Scott Pelley in 60 Minutes about Donald Trump being sloppy, and it's inexcusable that you could have classified documents sitting around Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, David, and I think we may have just lost David there. Well, we always appreciate David Brody's insight as our chief political analyst. A lot to keep our eyes on as this story continues with both President Biden and former President Trump. Well, to the economy, the newest numbers are in, and inflation is seeing a slight reprieve. According to today's Consumer Price Index measurement, inflation rose at a slower rate in December, up 6.5% compared to just 1 year ago. That's a decrease from November 2022. President Biden is crediting his economic policies for the inflation slowdown.
So the data is clear. Even though inflation is high in major economies around the world, it's coming down in America month after month, giving families some real breathing room. And the big reason is falling gas prices. And we still have more work to do, though. But we're clearly moving in the right direction.
So here with us now is Stephen Moore, chairman of FreedomWorks Task Force on Economic Revival. Steve, I appreciate the time and thank you for joining us. These latest numbers seem like some welcome news on the inflation front, but prices were still higher year over year. What's your takeaway from the new numbers?
Well, it really is a good news, bad news story. The good news, let's start with that, is that you're right, that we saw a big reduction in the month-over-month inflation rate for the month of December. And so that's good news. It shows that the president is right, that we are seeing a reduction in inflation, which, remember, earlier this last summer, the inflation rate hit over 9%, which was the highest rate in a year in my lifetime, practically. And so that's the good news. We are seeing improvement. But I mean, I kind of laughed when I heard you play that segment from Biden saying, oh, look, my policies are bringing down inflation. No, his policies are the policies that created the high inflation in the first place. I mean, let's not forget that when Trump left office, the inflation rate was 1.5%. And then 18 months later, it was at 9%. And it was a result of his massive spending binge of trillions and trillions of dollars. So we're not out of the woods yet. There is some improvement, but 6.5% inflation for the year also means about 13% inflation since Biden came into office. That's a big surge in prices, especially when you compare that to American workers' wages.
Now, to your point about the policies, is there anything the government could do right now to get some relief out there? Should the Fed stop raising rates? What can we see there?
Well, there's two things that would be the most important. One is to just drill for our energy, drill, baby, drill, as they say, produce more energy here at home. That would help the economy, and it would also continue to reduce gas prices. Because remember, China is going to come back online after COVID, so they're going to be drinking up a lot of that energy. So we need to be producing more of it so that gas prices don't go back to, $5 a gallon as they were this summer. And the other thing that needs to be done, even more importantly, is Republicans need to take a chainsaw out of this budget. I mean, we cannot continue to borrow $1.5 trillion a year. And I said trillion, not a billion. These are numbers that are unfathomably high, and this massive increase in spending and debt is really the match that lit the forest fire of inflation in the first place.
Well, we've been hearing about one of those bad words out there, recession, for most of 2022. And experts say the risk is still there for one. So what can we expect for 2023? Do we have one on the horizon?
It's hard to predict, I have to say. You know, the economy shows, one day it'll show some signs of strength, and then other days it shows signs of weakness. I think, you know, if you look at the kind of official forecast, it's for 1 to 1.5% growth, which is not a recession, but it's just kind of stagnation. It's like it's just barely trudging forward. We need the economy to be growing by 3 or 4%. You know, put more people back into jobs. So let's see real wage growth for American workers. Remember, the average worker has lost about $4,000 in the last 18 months because of this burst of inflation, which is like a sales tax, right? Think about inflation as a sales tax on everything that you buy. So we can't go forward with inflation, you know, of 7, 6, 5, or even 4%. We've got to get it back down to 2%, which is the Fed's target, and we're still a long way from there.
Well, to go back to that good news, bad news you said at the beginning, we have seen inflation cool off a little bit, but some prices are still stubbornly high. Can Americans expect a reset to lower price points anytime soon, or maybe not even soon, anytime ever? Yeah. I mean, look, the Fed is going to take some further action. The problem is that when the Fed continues to raise interest rates, guess what? That slows down the economy. Look what it's done to the housing market, which has come to a standstill. So that's another good news, bad news story. Is the good news is we know what has to be done to slow inflation. The bad news is it's like chemotherapy. It's not so fun to go through. And so that's, I think, where we are at right now. You're going to see a big fight in the months to come over the budget between the Republicans who run the House and President Biden. And I don't want the Republicans to blink. I think they've got to really get a tough stance on this massive debt that we've amassed in the first 2 years of Joe Biden's presidency. Well, a lot to monitor as we head into 2023. Steve Moore, we really appreciate the time and insight. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
While the economy is a leading focus for many lawmakers, as you heard Steve just mention, China is also a top priority. One of the first items of business for the GOP-led House, establishing a new select committee to push back against the communist regime and defend American interests. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke has more on the strategy to combat the country considered to be the #1 threat to the United States. Caitlin.
That's right, Matt. The House is making clear it's time to counter China's aggression and expose its strategy of undermining American sovereignty. This new committee is a signal Democrats and Republicans alike sense the urgency of acting now.
There is bipartisan consensus that the era of trusting Communist China is over.
The House voted overwhelmingly to create the Select Committee on China by a vote of 365 to 65.
As Secretary of State Anthony Blinken put it last year, China is the only country with both the intent to reshape the international order and, increasingly, the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do it.
Representative Mike Gallagher, the pick to chair the committee, says its focus will be repairing supply chains, reclaiming U.S. economic independence, beefing up U.S. military posture, and preventing theft of American intellectual property.
The Select Committee will expose the CCP's coordinated whole-of-society strategy to undermine American leadership and American sovereignty while working on a bipartisan basis and with the committees of jurisdiction to identify long overdue, common-sense approaches to counter CCP aggression.
7 Republicans and 5 Democrats will comprise the group, armed with the authority to hold public hearings.
We want the very best ideas. Doesn't matter where they come from. And at the end of the day, we don't need a majority and a minority report. We just need one philosophy with one principle, and America will be stronger for the future to come.
In a statement on the China Select Committee, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said, quote, House Democrats will work in a serious, sober, and strategic manner to evaluate our relationship with the Chinese government and to address the rise of authoritarianism globally. Matt?
Republicans and Democrats working together. Caitlin, thank you. Well, coming up, vandalism or terrorism. Next on Faith Nation, how new attacks are raising concerns over the safety of the U.S. electrical grid. Welcome back. Is America's power grid under attack? In recent weeks, several compromising crimes have taken place at electrical substations across the country. While in one case, suspects have been identified, other attacks remain unsolved. As Chuck Holton reports, that has authorities worried if this is just vandalism or part of a coordinated attack on the power grid.
April 16, 2013, a Silicon Valley electrical substation came under rifle fire in a coordinated and well-planned attack, causing millions in damages and nearly taking out power to Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Intel. In the 10 years since that attack, no culprit has been found. Was it terrorism or vandalism? We still don't know. Now, a new wave is targeting America's electrical grid. On December 3rd, 2 North Carolina substations were shot at, knocking out power to 40,000 homes and businesses. Then on Christmas Day, 4 substations were vandalized in Washington state.
All 3 happened in the middle of the night on Christmas Day, causing power outages. There's a good possibility they are related. We're going to be investigating to see if this was coordinated by a specific group of people.
While authorities search for suspects, what they really need are answers.
We are aware of other incidents that occurred in Oregon and southern Washington, as well as the incidents from North Carolina earlier in this wintertime. We're going to see if any of this stuff is related to that.
There are almost 79,000 of these electrical power substations all across the United States, connecting nearly 500,000 miles of power lines in 3 big power grids. Now, when these things were built, there wasn't much thought given to security, so most of them look about like this one, a rusty old gate and a chain link fence, safeguarding millions of dollars worth of equipment just inside there, like those ultra high voltage transformers over there, which are all custom built. That means that if they get destroyed, it might take up to a year to replace them. And that's causing the authorities to start to see this as a real threat to our national security.
20 years ago, I was on a task force with Homeland Security as part of the Secretary's office, and we were looking at exactly what's happening today. And unfortunately, it's gotten worse since then.
The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has called on local power co-ops to conduct a security evaluation of all substations by the end of April, and will then make recommendations on how to better secure America's power supply. But it's a daunting task.
We've got a bunch of enemies now that hate this country, and some are internal. So it should cause us to go, hey, well, wait a minute now. We need to really look at hardening up our grids.
The 2013 attacks in California cost Pacific Gas and Electric more than $150 million for security upgrades. So fixing this problem won't be cheap.
We definitely need to look at making some of our key facilities way more hardened than they are. But the real issue is, how do we create redundancy within the system to make sure that if one element fails, our whole grids are not going down?
Chuck Holton, CBN News.
Well, turning overseas now, Russia is stepping up cyber attacks targeting Ukrainian civilians. Russia's lackluster performance on the battlefield has led to increased attacks on the people of Ukraine, targeting everything from power plants to train stations to even hospitals. Now, Moscow is increasing cyber attacks, especially targeting services like internet and electricity. An NSA official tells Politico the longer the war goes on, the more at risk Ukraine is to, quote, destructive cyber attacks against the critical infrastructure. Well, lingering symptoms that could lead to long-term health issues. A look at long COVID and the other diseases it could cause after this. In health news, a majority of long COVID symptoms appear to clear up after about a year. That's the finding of a new study published in the health journal, the BMJ. Researchers found for those who had an initial mild COVID-19 diagnosis and then experienced lingering after effects like fatigue, cough, chest pain, and brain fog, symptoms seem to resolve themselves in about 12 months. But for some, though, long COVID can be debilitating and lead to lifelong health issues. Medical reporter Lori Johnson brings us a first-hand look at the disease and what's being done to better understand it.
But once I got COVID, and now on the other side of it, all I have now is my faith, my family, and a few friends.
Marjorie Roberts experienced a loss in quality of life when her long COVID symptoms took hold.
Losing my breath, exhaustion, a level of fatigue that I had never in my life experienced. It was just so many different things.
Shelby Boyd tells a similar story.
Being in bed for about 6 months and having just chronic pain. I had tremors. I had blackouts.
Like millions with long COVID, Marjorie and Shelby hope to recapture the life they enjoyed before COVID.
I rode horses. I was a super busybody. I'd been in the business world for the last 8 years working.
The CDC estimates 1/3 of people who had COVID-19 have lingering symptoms.
There's so much interest and attention around long COVID now, as there should be, because it's affecting so many of us.
Early research shows similarities between brains affected by long COVID and those of chemotherapy and Alzheimer's patients.
COVID almost certainly affects what we call the blood-brain barrier. And as you may know, normally there's really a tight seal that keeps toxins and various kinds of chemicals we don't want, out of our brain and in our blood. But COVID seems to weaken that.
And it's not just the brain. A new study shows people who've had COVID are 40% more likely to develop diabetes within a year than those not infected.
The science is definitely starting to demonstrate this link between people who previously had COVID and increasing rates of new diabetes diagnoses.
Public health leaders say they're expanding research.
Long COVID is real, and there is still so much we don't know about it.
Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Well, coming up, from serving food to saving lives, a special reunion when we come back. Well, finally tonight, an EMT is being honored for saving a pastor's life. Anthony Palmer recently went into cardiac arrest while officiating a wedding, but it just so happens one of the caterers working the event also happened to be an EMT. 22-year-old Valeria Franco jumped into action, performing CPR for 30 minutes before an ambulance arrived. Her action now credited with saving Palmer's life. She recently reunited with the pastor for the first time. It came as she was honored for her heroism during a ceremony at the local city hall. Well, heroes certainly can come in all shapes and sizes, and it's not a bad idea to have a CPR class under your belt. That's going to do it for us. We'll see you tomorrow.